Hi everybody, thank you for joining today's event, focused around combining Azure and the Power Platform to unleash your data's potential. Bit of housekeeping just to kick off, so we welcome any questions throughout, just drop them in the chat. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time to go through them or answer them today, but if you just call out if it's for anybody specifically, put their name in and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as possible. Just before we kick off, quick kind of introduction to all the speakers. So I'm Joe Wolski, I'm Technical Director for ANS, I'm today's host. And we've got our keynote speaker from Microsoft, which is Robin Soutaris, the Chief Data Officer. She's going to talk to us a bit about the Microsoft vision and the strategy. And that's going to be followed by Rob Cottrell and Clarissa Dillingham, who are the Data and AI and Power Platform Practice Leads, respectively. And they're effectively going to talk about how we can bring data to life using both Azure and the Power Platform. So, right from the start, how do you get going? Where do you start? What's the art of the possible? The do's and don'ts and things like that. So I'm also conscious there's quite a few people on today's session. Some of you may not know much about ANS, so I thought I'd just spend a minute or two on who we are and really what the inspiration is on today's event. What are we seeing in the market? And why we're talking about what we're talking about today. So we were founded in 1996. We were born in Manchester, so we're not a new organisation. And in that time, we've probably seen a dozen technical transformations, and you can see them when they start to hit the market at force. And I think that data in particular is hitting the market really, really hard now. Everybody and all our customers, all the organisations that we're working with and talking to are really focused on how they can start to realise value from the data. And within that, us as a digital transformation and cloud services provider, we've got a lot of customers who started their journey with cloud, so they're already very familiar with either Azure or Dynamics and Power Platform as independent kind of technologies, but really they're wanting to understand how they can start to exploit both together. And that for us is really been a catalyst for today's talk. They're understanding now that actually, I can get great analytics out of Azure. It's really powerful from an AI and a machine learning perspective. I can develop amazing applications, but how do I operationalize that data in the enterprise? How do I democratize that data out into all our different teams within the business and things like that? So us as business, we've got around 300 staff now. About 200 of those are technical, which again gives us a real good insight. But also, it's one of the reasons we're kind of seeing this. We've got quite a broad technical capability, everything ranging from core Azure and DevOps skills right up through to your cloud native and obviously the Power Platform and Dynamics and business applications capability as well. So really broad capability, and this is I think why we're seeing so much momentum in this space, where our customers have engaged with us on one part and then now we're looking to broaden up on that. And with that, we're sometimes top 50 employer. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to touch on that today is because not only does it drive a good culture with our customers, but it means we're attracting a very vibrant, forward-thinking workforce. The technical teams within ANS are constantly driving for innovation and really pushing the barriers with our customers and how we get there. And when I talk about our customers, we're very much mid-market enterprise, which I think is another key point for today. We're not talking about what the FTSE 500 are looking at doing and what some of the most forward-thinking large enterprises are doing across the world. We're talking about the UK mass market. These kind of technologies are now being adopted at scale. These techniques, everything that these customers are looking to do, they've not got endless deep pockets. They are looking to do this because it actually is now making sense, both commercially and technically, especially with the advancements that things like COVID have driven in digital transformation agendas. It's really at the forefront of everybody's mind. And I guess if you were to kind of ask somebody who doesn't really know ANS that well, who they are, what do they do, I think everyone would say we're very strong in Azure, and I think that's right to say. But I think, again, just touching on what I touched on a moment ago, the exponential growth we've seen in data and business applications over the last 18 to 24 months has been absolutely exponential. It's going off at an absolutely incredible rate, and I'd actually turn around and kind of displace that just as an Azure partner and say that actually we're very much Microsoft Cloud specialists. We've worked on 20-30 projects in the last 12 months, all of them being incredibly innovative. There's some amazing projects going on in Azure in their own right, both around infrastructure and data. There's also some incredible projects going on around the Power Platform in their own right. But where we're really seeing some of the most innovative, interesting projects is when customers are looking at bringing the two together. And so we've created and built up an incredible amount of experience and understanding on how you can actually exploit those technologies together as one under a common platform and common operating model. And just before handing over to Robin, I really wanted to touch on the broader market and what, you know, this is a Gartner report. It was a CIO kind of survey that was done at the beginning of this year, and it was really where you're looking to spend your money relative to where you were spending it last year. And you can see there's been a huge shift in terms of the enterprise rebalancing their spend portfolio. Now, what's interesting about this is that actually when you look at them all independently, things like process automation, you know, data and AI, all the kind of different things, you can quite clearly see that they're all very digital initiatives, they're very, very forward-thinking initiatives, and they're very progressive, and they're all about moving organizations forward and becoming more digital. But when you kind of read between the lines of this, you can see that actually there's a lot of harmonious kind of capabilities that organizations are looking at, and actually they're all underpinned by data. You know, you kind of look at process automation. The best process automation kind of workflows run off data. When you want true autonomy, where it's completely hands off, that is completely driven by data. So you can't really even get there until you've got that kind of data capability in place. And the same applies for many, many more. I guess the key takeaway for me, certainly on this slide, is that, you know, data is the most valuable asset of organizations today. They want to secure it, they want to analyze it, and more importantly, they want to automate it and build on it. And that really was the inspiration for today's event. So I'm going to hand over to Robin now, and she's going to take you through Microsoft vision and where they're going strategically and how they see the market. Hi, Robin, are you there?
I am, Joe. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to share. I just have to reiterate what Joe shared. We are absolutely super excited at Microsoft when we think about the possibility of what organizations can do once they actually can harness the power of their data. We're seeing completely transformational customer experiences, employees being empowered to do their jobs more effectively and efficiently. Operational excellence is really being driven across organizations. Sustainability goals, and then really creating new products and services that just never were possible before. So I wanted to take a few minutes to share with you what is Microsoft's vision when it comes to Azure Data Services, and how are we thinking about the tools and platforms that are going to empower organizations to use their data more effectively and more efficiently. The first is really around data modernization. Lots of organizations and customers ask me about how do I break down the silos of my data? We have legacy systems that have been on-premise forever. You know, they're sitting in SQL Server, they're sitting on Oracle, IBM. How do we really break those down and combine them with databases that are being built in the cloud today? How do I combine them internal across my organization? And how do I actually share and think about combining it with data external to my organization? And so when we think about modernizing your data platform, it's everything from the continued investments that we're making in SQL Server. How do you actually leverage things like Azure Data Studio to be able to combine Oracle databases with big data clusters with a SQL Server to actually drive insight? It's investment in all of the open source options you have in Azure. So I don't know that very many people are familiar, but we do actually have Azure offerings for MariaDB, Postgres, MySQL. And so really trying to think of all of the different sort of assets and capabilities that an organization would have where they will be trying to tie together those data sets. The other thing is multi-cloud and polycloud. Lots of organizations are using multiple clouds for several reasons. And so how do you make sure that you have the right tools and systems that allow you to actually support that environment and combine those data sets? The second attribute is really cloud native applications. So if you think about the power of the cloud, the scalability, the capacity, the capabilities that exist in the cloud that you just can't replicate in your on-prem data center. And so how do you think about taking advantage of those capabilities and capacity in a data service where it makes sense for your organization? So for us, this is really our Cosmos DB offering. It's our NoSQL How do you think about multi-master? How do you think about low latency reads and writes? How do you think about global scalability? This was actually created for Microsoft to solve our own problem for Xbox. Like, how do you support gamers globally in a way that's real time expectations of very low latency when it comes to gaming. And so we originally wrote that product for that capacity. It's now expanded to support things like Teams, particularly in the pandemic where we saw such a bigger consumption of organizations using that capacity. And we needed to make sure that they could do video and calls in real time. And so it's just amazing now what power cloud databases have unlocked for organizations. The third attribute is really around analytics and insight, right? We say that data is strategic for every organization, but it's really the insight and value you get out of the data. Data in and of itself is just data, right, sitting there. And so for us, this is Azure Synapse Analytics. The vision for that really ultimately is to be a single pane of glass where you can do everything from your ingestion to transformation. How do you combine your big data and your data warehouse and data lakes into a single sort of aggregated platform and be able to then output it onto Power Platform, Power BI visualization? How can you leverage Azure machine learning then against those data sets and be able to keep track of the data that the organization is using without constantly having to move or rewrite your data and all of the overhead that comes with ETL that you want to minimize and migrate. The other thing is, how do you unlock the power and upskill your organization? So when we think about insights, it's really how can everyone within the organization leverage data to be able to do their job better? And so how do you allow sort of the citizen data analyst and give them the capability to be able to access the right data in a controlled, compliant way? And so that is the vision of Synapse, is that you will have a single pane of glass or a single platform to be able to do those functions. Data science is the other attribute. I think every organization gets especially your executives, I'm sure, get super excited when you talk about machine learning and AI and we're going to change the world. But data is really underneath all of that. And so how do you make sure that you have transparency when you think about your AI and machine learning algorithms? How do we think about combining that with your data modernization so you can do things at the edge and actually run machine learning models without having a dependency on writing back to the cloud and the delays that sometimes happen? And so how do you think about real-time machine learning and AI to really empower your customer and citizen experiences? And then the last component that Microsoft is really investing in when we think about Azure Data Services is governance. I think every organization since the inception of, or probably even prior, but GDPR has really brought it to the forefront for many, many organizations. How do we think about data cataloging? How do we know what data we have? How do we do lineage and track who's had access to it, who's changed it? How do we classify it to make sure that people are only accessing the data that they should have access to? How do we think about master data management? These are the conversations I'm having every day. And so again, how do we think about, for Microsoft, that really is purview, super early in the life cycle. It's a huge vision they have, I think, to be able to have that single pane, again, a single pane of glass when you think about data sharing internally and externally in a controlled, compliant way, all the way up to privacy ops is ultimately on the future roadmap. And so when we think about all of that platform together, I think the one thing I want to close with is really the unique value I think that Microsoft brings into this space is that all of this is written with the common data model and the common data service. And this is absolutely where partners like ANS are amazing to work with when we think about how do you take your employee data out of your Microsoft 365? How do you take your customer insights out of Dynamics? How do you think about your business application data? And then how do you tie all of that together in the data platform and then render it out in Power Apps and Power BI so that your organization can actually use the data to do their jobs? And because it's all written on that common data model, the integration is simpler than it would be if you use a non-Microsoft solution. But again, would love to turn it over to Rob and the ANS team to share with us some real world examples of how they've tied these things together for the benefit of organizations. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Robin. Really exciting to kind of see where Microsoft's vision is and what the roadmap looks like certainly for me, being able to see it and to be hands-on with it day to day with our customers, I can certainly see how Microsoft are going to change that landscape and really help democratize the use of data across organizations. But just to kind of follow on from that, myself and Clarissa now are going to take you through a bit of a journey, kind of show you, where that starting point is for organizations, and then how you can really leverage that with the use of Power Platform, Power Apps, and be able to have some real value within your organization while using that data. And really, it starts with the culture. A data-driven culture is somewhere where every organization should aspire to be. It's about breaking down those data silos and leveraging the benefits that the data has. Most organizations are either collecting data or generating data at such a vast rate that they don't know what to do with it, or there's little bits within an organization who are trying to leverage it in isolation, and they're not really singing from the same hymn sheet to drive that wider organizational value. And if you kind of look at the slide that's up in front of you now, this is the typical journey path for most organizations. It starts with breaking down those disparate data silos. Everyone's got business units that have applications that underpin them, and the data is their data, it's no one else's. But that data has value across a wider organization. Without breaking that down and having that data in a common place, a common access layer for everyone to leverage, it's not really adding that value to the wider organization. And that's where that data lake comes into. And the data lake is a fantastic concept of aggregating that data into a common access tier. That is that kind of single layer where you can build up on for all of your data initiatives. Automation, as Joe mentioned before, you can't really leverage automation without the data. The data really drives that forward, and being able to automate those business processes is a real advantage to organizations. Moving on from that automation, you've got your analytics, starting with a descriptive, looking at historical, what's happened, how did something happen, and doing that traditional reporting. Then kind of building up to really what we're talking about today, is to operationalizing that data. How can you use data from multiple systems and build an application off the back of it? Master data in multiple locations, but still have an interface for users to leverage that data that someone else has created. A really good example of enabling that kind of citizen developer mentality, where users have access to the data. The data has been brought out of these source systems, it's been transformed, it's been cleansed. You've got security and governance over the top of it, so what's happening with it. But then users can access it to build these applications to make their lives easier, but hopefully, be innovative and progress an organization forward. And then you're kind of moving into, the higher tier, your predictive analytics and your prescriptive analytics, where you're looking at predicting into the future, but you're also looking at driving the future as well. Data has the power to do that. You can know, if I was to pivot one way, you can forecast the data that far in advance that you can say, well, it's going to be a positive pivot or a negative pivot, and you can use that data to really drive the decisions of an organization and really help progress moving forward. But what is a data-driven culture? It's something that gets asked a lot. There's loads of different interpretations of it. This is mine. People are key to any culture within an organization. The people have to be behind it, typically driven from the top down, but everyone should be embracing data. Data is what everyone works from, it's what everyone generates, it's what they collect. If they're not embracing that and they don't see it as a value to what they do day in, day out, then the wrong people who are being involved in that process. People drive the culture, and you need the people behind it to really make that positive impact within an organization. And as I say, driving that from the top down is a real good way of demonstrating the value and the power of data. And the next one is decisions. If you're not using data to drive decisions, you've not got that culture. The data should be there to underpin every business decision that you want to make, but it should also be there to help identify maybe decisions or opportunities that you didn't know you needed to make. And it should be involved in every decision process that happens across the entire business should be driven by the data. Is it going to have a positive impact? Is it going to have a negative impact? If you're in a sort of a customer type organization, is it going to have a positive impact on the customers? Is it not? Next up is innovation. Innovation is something that every organization needs to be doing. If you're not innovating, you're not really progressing forward. And innovation doesn't have to be, completely ripping the rule book up and starting again. It could be little things. We talk about process automation a lot. If you've got someone there updating a spreadsheet and they're spending 40 plus hours a month doing that one job, but you can automate it, and save a lot of time, that's innovation. That person can then be spent adding more value to the organization in other areas. The organization is leaner, it's more effective. And innovation can mean a number of things, but you should be innovating, and you should be doing that by having that access to the data. Data should be accessible. It should be accessible to everyone. They don't have to see absolutely all of the data, but the data should be available in pockets. You can remove sensitive data, you can mask personally identifiable information to only the people who need to see it. But there should be the data from these business units that have value to cross-pollinate other business units to make their business unit more effective or add value. It should be accessible. You should have that data catalog to improve the data literacy across an organization, and you should make that accessible to everyone. And it should be something that's encouraged for everyone to go and see what data is available to them. Don't just work in your own area, the data you've got access to. Go and see what data is available to you and can it add value. The likes of Synapse and Power BI have made great strides in breaking down these barriers, and I fully believe PureView, that Robin mentioned before, is going to be the tool that really kind of drives this forward over the next sort of 12 to 18 months, where it becomes onboarded. It's obviously still relatively in its infancy at the minute, but as it matures, it's going to break down these barriers and make it accessible to everyone. Data should be viewed as an asset, and this is something that is driven from the top down. If the management team understand that data is an asset and they treat it as an asset in terms of, if they sell products or something else, data should be just as valuable as that because it will drive those decisions. That mentality is flooded down throughout an organization. If you see the value of data and it's presented in that way, that data is valuable. We have data on our customers, our business, our process. We use that to drive everything forward, to make these decisions. That mentality is almost contagious. Everyone gets behind it and gets on board with it and become, more receptive to using data and how data can be used and sharing the data within an organization to better cross-pollinate those business units. And finally, from a culture is strategy. Clear strategy, clear vision is something that's often overlooked. Typically we want to use data. I want to use AI and ML in 5 years, and that's great, but it's not a strategy. There's AI and ML are great tools, but you need to have the foundations in place. You need to have the culture in place to really leverage and get the benefits out of it. Otherwise, the value, there's value there, but all the value isn't there. And a strategy doesn't have to be something that is defined now for the next 5 years. 5 years is a long time. The rate of change and innovation, certainly from Microsoft, just means that isn't viable. You should have a long-term strategy for 5 years in, 5 years out. I want to be delivering on this outcome. I want data to be driving this for me, increasing revenues, or making my organization much more efficient, much more lean. But there should be natural breakpoints within a strategy to allow for the evolution of technology, the evolution of the culture, and the evolution of the organization as you mature on that path. There's obviously going to be some challenges along the way. I've highlighted a couple here. These are the main ones that I see day in, day out that typically cause organizations the most sort of difficult to overcome. The vision is the main one. I can't stress enough, you need to define that vision. You need the right people, the right steering group to define that vision, who understand the business, the processes to drive that forward. Funding is a difficult one. Most organizations have capital to invest in innovation, but they require a very strict way to define the return on investment from that, and a data culture and a sort of the data strategy and tools to do it. Sometimes very difficult to formalize on paper to get that backing, and certainly if you need to external onto a board. People and processes, I say, it's fundamentally you need the right people in place to back this, to make it a success, and you need the right processes to underpin that decision making. Culture, again, that feeds off the process and people. You need the culture in place. You need to drive that from the top down, and you need to make sure that it is, it's a data-driven culture within the organization. The data's there. The data is the lifeblood of sort of every organization, and it should be treated as that way. Difficulty, data-driven transformations, they're not easy. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to unlock a load of doors for you, immediately. There are going to be times where it is difficult, and sometimes, when you hit a difficult patch, it's sometimes easy just to stop and go back to the way you're doing. But persevering with it, overcoming that difficult challenge, and moving ahead with it on that vision, sticking to that vision that you defined because you know the value there is something that I can only say, you know, do keep going. It does get easier and it does get better. And then the starting point, you know, sometimes everyone thinks the starting point is dead easy to start, but, you know, most people tend to overcook that first iteration of things. You know, they're looking at the outcomes based. How do I solve this outcome? I want to do this, and they spend months and months and months trying to figure out the best approach to do something, but they've never actually not delivered anything. There's no value, there's no tangible benefits there. After 12 months, you get to the reverse review point, you're not delivered anything, there's no value. You know, they deem it a failure, move on. Start small, iterate, and build that culture, and you'll find it snowballs after a period of time. You know, there's the new way of kind of unlocking the data, and I said before, that starting point, most people focus on that kind of ETL approach where they're extracting just want to load it for a very specific use case, getting data out of applications to do that. You know, better way of doing it is kind of the new ELT approach. Get your data out of the systems, unlock the data, you know, get the data aggregated, whether it's on-premise, in the cloud, or a hybrid environment. Build those operational databases, build those data warehouses, build those data lakes, and you'll find it's much easier to innovate and access that data. This is a sort of conceptual data strategy, which we work from, and you can kind of see kind of working from the bottom up. You know, liberate data out of these source systems. That's always the hardest part. Get the data out, get it into this data lake, understand the life cycle, the security, the structure of the data, and once it's there, you've got a consistent starting point to use regardless of what you're doing with data. And you can see there's quite clearly a couple of different tracks there. You know, you've got your data discovery to understand what data is there. That feeds really nicely into those data science activities, creating models, training models off that data, you know, your data virtualization or your data warehousing. And then you've got this interoperability at the top where these services can now leverage each other's capabilities. You know, you can use some data science models to enrich data from a data warehouse, but it's fundamentally being fed from this consistent tier at the bottom, and that consistent tier can also be used for this operationalizing of the data, which we're obviously discussing today. You know, you can use that to integrate resource systems, you can use it to build these operational data stores, which then underpin these line of business applications, Power BI, Excel, Power Platform, and Dynamics. And this is a really good way. You can start, you know, very quickly, you can iterate very quickly, and you're showing value very quickly. And the reason that you do that, and if you've seen on that last slide, there was a couple of different icons on each of them. Well, it's a conformity across the Microsoft ecosystem, right? The Microsoft applications that are available to you, they're all designed to work together. They can all leverage the capabilities of each other. And this data lake, building this operational data store, whether it's a common data model, on top of Dataverse, a data lake, all of this data can now be leveraged, whether it's, as say, business applications in Dynamics 365, reporting applications, process automation is a real key part, your analytics, or whether you just develop and got a line of business applications, it's all underpinned by this consistent access tier, and you can access it whether you want low code, no code, or high code.
So that's what it looks like from a kind of data strategy point of view. But what does it look like from the point of view of the user? Well, before we're in this really awkward spot of having people having to know exactly where all their different data is. Maybe they have some ERP processes, they're in an ERP system, maybe they've got some other data that's sitting in an SQL server, maybe they've got some spreadsheets that are just banding about, lots of different kind of IT troublemakers who have created these solutions that work for them, but are very difficult to for central IT to manage. And in order to create anything, the user's got to know exactly where all this data is. They've got to know how to connect to all of these different disparate sources. And it can be really high barrier of entry for users to actually start to add value and create applications that will help the organization. So instead, it's so much better to then just be able to flip it into that operational data store. So as Rob was saying, we combine all of these disparate silos, break the barriers, have one layer, one single pane of glass, as Robin was saying, that will allow people to be able to access all of the data anywhere. And if you give the users this ability, to have access to that aggregated data, then they can start to produce value using low-code tools like Power Platform. So now they don't need to bother with knowing how to link to all of these different systems, or even knowing what system holds payroll data, what system holds stock data. They will be able to just go to that single operational data layer that will enable them to start creating. And for Power Platform, what we generally recommend is that we use Microsoft Dataverse as that operational data store. And that, of course, brings about the very pointed question of why Dataverse? And if we look at what Microsoft Dataverse is it's really that part of the Power Platform that allows for that democratization. It's all about creating a single universal view of your data that then people can use. It's that foundation for all Power Platform tools. While you can use Power Platform tools with other data sources, you'll get the most optimal performance and the best features when you're using it in conjunction with Dataverse. As Robin was talking about, Dataverse also follows the common data model, and whenever you create a new Dataverse, it comes with all of these different entities and tables already preloaded that are part of that common data model, which really gives you a nice kickstart into starting to build your data model and what your Dataverse actually will look like. Another key point is that Dataverse, as with everything in the Power Platform, is all about accessibility. And when we talk about it's security that you as a business user will be able to understand, configure and control. You don't need people who have software background or IT techie guys to be able to control this for you. And it gives you that control to be able to say, this is a security role that is based on my AD group in Azure AD, and these people are going to be able to see these records. They're going to be able to edit these records, and maybe they won't be able to see these ones. And the beauty of it is that then when you build elements on top of this Dataverse layer, those elements in the Power Platform will look back to Dataverse to say, hey, what data should I be showing these individuals? So if an individual shouldn't be able to see payroll data and you create an application that uses payroll data, even if you share that application with them, when they go in, they won't be able to see those records that they're prohibited from seeing by Dataverse. And the user who actually creates the Power App that is on top of this application doesn't need to do anything to do with security because it's all handled at that Dataverse layer. So it's a huge benefit of using Dataverse. And of course, as Robin was saying, all of these elements within the Microsoft stack are all designed to be able to integrate with each other. So when you actually go into Dataverse, you can see with a single click, you can get to this screen where you can link to SQL, you can start linking into SharePoint, you can start linking into Azure Synapse, and even you've got a whole separate tab for creating that link with Synapse. So it's hugely integrated, part of the family, and is kind of the direction that Microsoft are heading. Especially in terms of Power Platform. And when we talk about it as this kind of operational data store, it can be easy to forget that it's more than just a database. In fact, that data storage capability is just the tip of the iceberg with Dataverse. What you get with it is, on top of the fact that you can store data there, you get that relational data model, and as I say, that's augmented off the bat by that common data model and those tables that you'll get right out of the box. You've got this ability to use the native tools to create these easy to access and easy to build interfaces so that people can really easily start querying the data just using well, without really even realizing that what they're doing is querying the data. They just see a view that they can filter just as they would in any normal application or in, say, an Excel table. And they can create their own forms that will be able to allow them to input and edit the data. And what you can do as well with these forms is you can create rules that allow you to define when certain fields should be visible, or when certain questions should appear, or what data should be locked, should be read only, should be hide, based on not only the user security, but also just the stage in the process where that user is. Also, of course, hugely powerful connectors, not just connecting down to the rest of Azure and all of the data capabilities within the Microsoft stack, but also connecting up into the rest of the Power Platform. And on top of that, being able to connect sideways across to hundreds of different third-party services. If you want to create an automation that will allow you to send a tweet out to Twitter, you can do it. There's all of these inbuilt connectors ready for you to use right off the bat. And that's not even all of it. We've still got so many more different capabilities within Dataverse. That safety and security that I was mentioning about, how you've got that security at that one layer that everything else then defers down to. Peace of mind, because all of your storage, you don't need to worry about having on-premise servers that you need to maintain. It's all, of course, in the cloud, managed by Microsoft. Application lifecycle management capabilities, which will allow you to actually accelerate the growth of your development environment, and how you actually use the different environments and move solutions through from development to test to production, and just be able to create that really professional movement through that life cycle, just with the ease of clicking a couple of buttons. And so when we think of Dataverse as that host for our business processes, really having Dataverse at the heart of those low-code solutions, as it says here, it sets your makers up for success. They don't need to worry about all of those tricky integrations and connections. That's already handled for them. They've got their single store of operational layer of data that they can then start building line of business applications on top of, and start creating value with tools such as Power Apps, Power BI, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents. I've also whacked Teams on there as well, because while we talk about an operational data source as a single pane of glass for your data, Teams is that single pane of glass for our actual interfacing with our work. And as I'm sure many of you have been working remotely during the pandemic, we've all come to live on Teams. And Power Platform is no different. So this all kind of brings us to that million-dollar question, right? If we've followed this process, we've aggregated up our data, we've got it into this operational data source in Dataverse. Now, what can we do with it? How do we actually unleash its potential? How do we start creating business value? And in order to go through this, we'll kind of imagine a scenario. So join us on a little thought experiment here. Imagine you have a business that works with stock, whether that's a retail company that you've got all your stock that's coming in and you're selling to customers, or you're a manufacturer and you've got supplies coming in that then you need to fabricate items out of and then pass on. Lots of different businesses, and especially relevant at the moment, for example, NHS and other healthcare institutions needing to manage the stock of vaccinations. Loads of different industries will require something that will allow them to manage their stock. And probably what a lot of people have is a mixture of Excel spreadsheets that other maybe people have created throughout the years, and you've got multiple different stores using different or multiple different sites or plants using different versions of these Excel spreadsheets, or you've got some ERP system that has some of that data locked away, but maybe they're augmenting it with some other processes. And the difficulties here are obviously having to manually pull all of the data from all those different areas. And if they're using disparate systems to store them, then it becomes a real headache to get that into one kind of place where you can then report upon that data. And of course, it's taking extra time. If people are on the front line, maybe they're in front of a customer and a customer is asking questions about some stock, then they won't be able to very quickly go away, go to a machine, open up their Excel spreadsheet, have a look through, try and find the answer, and then come back to the customer. That's not a good experience for the customer. And you kind of have this difficulty for management to then have this real-time overview across the entire organization. And without that bird's eye view, without that ability to see how data is moving across the entire organization, it becomes very difficult for you to start making improvements to your processes and changes that will then drive value. So let's move this into our data strategy. Let's create that operational data store layer in Dataverse. And now what we've been able to do is set security at all the different levels so that users can only see the data that's relevant to them. And we've automatically got all of our data flowing in from these different ERP systems, from these different Excel spreadsheets into one location. And the next thing we can do on top of that is actually create a model-driven Power App. And this is utilizing those native capabilities of Dataverse that I was talking about to create views and forms that then will enable people to be able to create a view that works for them, a form that works for them for this data, so that they can input, edit, manipulate, and start to see a slice of that data. And that will be able to give that user a single kind of input-output managed level, which can then flow back that information into those other siloed data stores. And also this gives us this really fantastic ability to be able to audit who did what and when, who entered this data. You start to gain a sense of accountability and being able to track changes through, which is very difficult to do in, for example, an Excel spreadsheet. But that's not the only application we'll create. Let's go ahead and also create a Canvas Power App. And say we, in our situation where we want to check stock and manage stock, it makes sense to enable frontline workers to be able to just have a quick app on their phone that allows them to scan a barcode, find out information about how much they have in stock of that particular item. And it allows our users to be able to access that data on the go. So Canvas apps, in amongst all of the other amazing capabilities that it has an inbuilt barcode scanner. So let's just make use of that. I haven't had to code a barcode scanner myself in order to pop it in. I'm just using the fact that that tool is already available. And this is where we start to come into the power of this low code, no code revolution, is that rather than having multiple people across loads of different organizations reinventing the wheel and creating their own barcode scanner, we can just make use of the fact that it's a tool that's there, it's already in place. Microsoft have coded it probably far better than a lot of us could have. So we use that, and then we can start to leverage the capability, even though potentially we don't have huge software development experience. And what we do with this is we really allow people to have that mobile access to the data. They don't need any training to use the model-driven app or to use, for instance, Dynamics. They because the application is intuitive by design. Instead, they just use the application just like they would any other app on their phone, and it helps them to be efficient and productive. But we won't stop there. Let's add an extra layer to this. Let's add some more value in. And we can create some flows in Power Automate to, for instance, automatically add items that go out of stock into a new order, or notify someone in, for example, Teams, that there are changes going on in the order. We can have a button on that application that we just saw that says add to the next order. And now users can start to gain that real-time control. So with a single press of a button, or just through things automatically happening, they'll be able to either affect the status of their stock, or they'll be able to be notified of the status of their stock and have that real-time view. And let's further integrate this with Microsoft Teams. Let's have notifications for managers of changes in the order, and potentially set up an approval process. So if a user, employee on their phone says, okay, I'd like to add this item to the order, then maybe a notification comes in for the manager to say, hey, would you like to add this to the order? It's been suggested, would you like to add it in? And so we can start to really connect our users together, just have those quick notifications. So these tasks that may have before taken up several minutes can be done in a matter of seconds. And let's keep going. Why not throw in a Power Virtual Agents layer? We can use the native language detection capabilities from Azure to provide responses to all kind of frequently asked questions. So if users are unsure about, for instance, some of the standards that they need to comply to with stock taking, or with any kind of stock management, then they can just either on their mobile or on their device ask a chatbot, hey, what are the standards? And the chatbot will be able to provide them with a link directly to that answer. And this kind of begins to allow users to have a self-service capability. And once again, just like with everything that we've layered on top to create this solution, this is drag and drop, easy to create, doesn't need any coding background or any software development background. And finally, let's create some visualizations in Power BI to really start making this pop and get that value back to the business. We've gotten a lot of value to our users and gotten them lots of productivity and efficiency gains. And this is where we start to really, on top of that, give a lot of information and insight back to the business. We can start to use these visualizations to tell a story with our data. Anyone who's looked at a spreadsheet of numbers will know that it doesn't really make much sense until you turn it into a chart. And those charts can really start to tell you what patterns you're seeing. And from those patterns, you can start to recognize potential opportunities. You can start to recognize high performers. And most importantly, you can begin to proactively change your processes or your structures, or get in more stock in this case, for certain items at certain times of year in certain locations, predicting those demands based on the insights that you've gained from your data. So we've gotten to a point where, by putting our data into this single layer and by enabling our users to then create business value on top of that data, we can now make a decision based on our data, which will improve our processes moving forward. And you don't need to stop there. You can continue building these layers and layers on top of this solution. And that's one of the beauties of the Power Platform and of the Microsoft stack, that all of these different tools are designed to fit together in this modular manner. But just taking it this far, we've seen so many benefits of using that well-structured data to then enable our users to create this living solution. so by founding our low-code innovation on top of data, that's how we unleash our full data potential. We use that sound data strategy, which will provide the necessary foundation for that democratized innovation. And on the other side, we use the low-code tools within the Power Platform to make the most of that data now we have it.
Great stuff. Thank you, Clarissa. And I guess thank you to all the speakers. I hope you've all found that as insightful as I have. Certainly the key takeaway for me is that we are bang centre in the middle of the digital transformation era, and it's data driven. And what we can do now to build on that and move on that moving forward as an industry, really, there's so much exciting times ahead. So thank you everybody for attending. I think anybody who's seen this will probably want to know a bit more. We've actually got a follow-on event for this, how to effectively get started with something like this. It all sounds good in theory, but how do I apply this to my business? You know, where do I start? How do I build a business case? How do I build a transformation plan? So we've got a follow-on event, 7th of July. Would love to have you there. If you need to move quicker, please feel free to reach out to myself, one of the A&S representatives, or even one of the Microsoft representatives. But that's it from everybody today. We'll try and get back to you on the questions as soon as possible. Thank you everybody for attending, and have a nice evening.